In ACI, contracts are how we control how devices in one group talk to devices in another group. They are basically like access control lists. So for instance, when I say that one group of devices can only talk to another group of devices over a certain port, I am in effect applying a layer 4 firewall policy or an access control list saying that this group of devices can only talk to this group of devices over these ports. They can also control how a group of devices talks to the outside network. So for instance, between my web servers and all the clients that are accessing my web servers over a layer 3 connection into my ACI fabric. Finally, if I was to create two separate VRFs underneath a tenant, for instance, I had a production tenant and I created a backup VRF and I created a production VRF, and I wanted all my production devices to be able to talk to my backup servers in a different VRF, I can control who sees what routes between the backup VRF and my production VRFs, and I can do that through a contract. Let's take a look at the pieces and parts that make up a contract. So typically, you would only have a single contract between two groups of devices. And then inside of the contract, I can put what we call a subject. In the subject, we control the direction of the filters that we are applying. So for instance, I could say, I only want the web tier to talk to the application tier over these ports. That can be a bidirectional subject or a unidirectional subject, saying that I'm only enforcing those ports in one way, or I'm only allowing that communication in one way. If it's bidirectional, I'm actually opening up the ports in both directions between the groups. The filters underneath the subject represent which ports or which application protocols the groups are allowed to talk on. So I might have a contract that says web to application communication. Underneath that contract, I'll have a subject that says application ports. And underneath that subject, I'll have different filters that open up the ports that I want these groups of devices to be able to talk underneath. So a filter contains the layer 2 through 4 attributes that allow the traffic between the two groups of devices. And these attributes can specify the ether type, the IP protocol type, TCP flags, application ports that are open. As I said before, this is very similar to an access list that allows communication between the two groups of devices. Now the thing about the contracts and the subjects and the filters is that I can define a contract, for instance, web communication, that I can actually reuse over and over again in my ACI fabric. So every time I have a new web server group, I can apply that same known good policy of web communication, which includes the right subjects and the right filters to allow communication to my web servers. So I don't have to recreate these contracts and subjects and filters every time. I can use known good policy over and over again, reducing the amount of human error in my environment and making for a much more secure network because I'm using policies that apply to my corporate security policy. Please join me for the next lesson, Understanding Contexts and Bridge Domains.